Hello, this video is to introduce you to some new changes that we've made to the mTree system that you can download and make use of immediately. So the first thing we have to do is we're going to actually look at a new version of mTree that's available on the the Docker Hub. And so what we're actually going to do is we're going to look at the mTree auction examples file. And what you'll notice there is, while we don't have to, presumably you've already installed Docker Desktop, what we can do is actually go ahead and look at the mTree site on Docker Hub to get an idea of what's going on. So if we go to the mTree site on Docker Hub, once this pulls up, we'll be able to make note of a couple things. So in this case, this is mTree. As you have, right? So this is just the project. And so we want to look at the tags. And so what you'll see is that there's two tags now. There's 0.9 and latest. Latest is perhaps an unfortunate naming. 0.9 is actually the latest and most up-to-date. So we need to actually pull down this separate image. And so we can actually copy this command just by clicking this button. Then if we go to PowerShell, then you can see what happens when you actually type in the command. So docker pull mTree / mTree : 0.9, and then your system will download these files reasonably quickly. So I already downloaded them just to skip that. Okay, so then once you have that, then what you're going to actually want to do is go to Docker Desktop, and we're going to actually look at these two images. And so what you're going to note, of course, is that we have the latest one, which you might have from before, and 0.9. So similarly to how we normally would run this, we will be able to hit run, and then what we'll be able to do is type in the port settings. So in this case, the port settings is port 5000. This is just to access a web interface. It should just work if you just type in port 5000. If it doesn't work, then there might be something else to look at, but I would be surprised if it doesn't. And then the actual host path, so we will we'll set it so that it's actually going to the repository that we've constructed with the repository of our code. So we'll set that up as we've done before. So mTree auction examples, again, you just pick the root of the file, and then the container path is /auctions, and then you'll be able to run it. And then actually in this instance, I've actually already have this running. So I'm going to kill the one version that's running so that you shouldn't actually experience this. If you do, then this is what to look for. We actually have multiple instances running. And then we've already configured this, so now we should be able to get this new one, Hungry Jennings, running. Okay, so then that should be running. So at this point, what we should be able to do is go to http://127.0.0.1:5000. This isn't any nefarious website. It's 127.0.0.1 is the address of your local computer. So what you'll see when you go to port 5000, or should see, is the mTree developer server. It's a web interface that's there, and it will tell you of the microeconomic systems it knows about, because those will be hosted in separate directories, right? So if you recall, we have the common value auction, which is in one directory, and Tentamont, which is in another directory. So in this instance, we're going to go to Tentamont. What you'll see is this is the MES overview page right here. This text that you're actually seeing here, this is actually generated from the readme.md or markdown file that's inside that directory. So for example, if you want to take notes or what have you, just to remind yourself, you can always edit that markdown file, and then it'll be available here for yourself or anyone else who's going to run it. We have additional documentation stuff that will be coming out soon as well. So then other things you can see here, obviously there's component view configurations and results browser. We're not going to talk about the simulation runner today. So if you go to the component view, what this does is does an inventory of all of the stuff you've been developing, and currently it's going to show you all of the different MES components and then it will tell you currently the directives that they respond to. It doesn't say what the total message space is. That'll be coming out shortly, but this right now it tells you all of the directives, right? So you can see you've built an environment, you can see you built an institution, and so in this case we're going to go into the tbuyer agent just to see, and then this will actually list out the directives. We're fixing it so it will also identify any properties you specified with this as well. So most of these directives you should be familiar with: set value, init agent, or perhaps. And then some of the stuff, storage and memory and simulation properties, those are system level directives that are available. You don't have to be aware of those, but that's why you might see them and be somewhat confused because they're not code. You can actually also hit this code tab, and then this will actually show you the code that you have running or that's there. Test will be working soon, and that'll actually allow you to change the state of a component and play around with stuff. So as though the idea is that it'll allow developers to work on a single MES component by themselves to verify that it will appropriately handle directives. And we'll have a separate video that discusses that. So now we're going to jump over to the configurations page. Sorry, the links are weird. So you go to the configurations page, and then you'll notice that it just lists the available configurations. In this case, we only have one, basic Tentamment, which is from the basic simulation file. So if we click on that, that'll basically pull up a slightly nicer view of it. It'll tell us what's going on. We have a simulation ID of 1, simulation name. You'll notice the environments are slightly different, or you might not, but they reference the file name and then the class that we're talking about. So T_environment and T environment. This isn't, you shouldn't have to know about this because there'll be configuration generators, but that's just, it's the file name that it comes from and then the class. And then in this case, we only have one institution, but we have multiple agents and different agent types. And so that's actually listed here. We also have this handy button that says run simulation. And so if we click this, what we can actually do is run the simulation, whatever is saved to disk currently. And then if it works, we should be able to go to the results browser, and then we'll see a couple of these different log files. And so what you'll notice is that there's a couple of them with experiment log, and then there's some that's experiment.data and experiment.log. You'll also notice that they have these weird numbers at the beginning. Well, the weird numbers represent the timestamp of when that simulation run occurred. We have a couple of other things we're doing, but at present, for each simulation you run, it'll group all those files together by the particular file name. So we'll start by looking at the experiment log. So in this case, the experiment log, it will simply provide whatever you tell it to write out, it will write out to the log file, and it will use the timestamp. So this is the timestamp. This is called Epoch Time if you've not encountered it before. It just represents the amount of time that's gone by since the start of the Unix epoch, which is 1970 or 72. And these are the reason why the timestamp is important, and you have to actually think about this, at least for now, until we do one of the upcoming updates. You're not guaranteed that the log messages are actually written in order. This is an odd property of the way we're doing computing. So it doesn't mean they're not acting in order, it just means they're not writing in order. So for example, if you look here, we have one at 723.983, we have 723.97, but in between there's 724.025. And this is just showing you that you'll get these kind of log hiccups. We'll have something that'll automatically sort this for you, but it's not available just yet. But the idea here is you'll be able to log messages out however you wish to put the logs in. In this case, these are just providing mostly information concerning the agents being set up and then actually preparing to make bids. So that's what's going on there. Nothing particularly exciting. And again, you do have to be mindful of the timing. So for example, this is 2.4.0, but then this is 2.4.11. So that's why it can look kind of shocking. So if we go back one, we can actually go and look at the data. And so this is a separate output file. So instead of, like, for example, if you were writing log messages to yourself to help diagnose things, in this instance, you can actually write log data out. And I'll show you the functions that generate these. Currently, this will print out the timestamp, as I said, and then whatever message you've told the the data logger to emit. So that's that. In this case, we're using a string. You could use JSON objects or any other arbitrary thing that can be represented as a string. So what we're also going to point out is if you go to the mTree auction examples, you'll see that the log files are all contained in this logs directory. So you'll notice that these are the two files we just viewed on the web. Additionally, if you go down to this thespian.log file, this is kind of a long file here. And so what this will actually show you is detailed messages about what's going on in the system. So in this case, for example, this is actually helping us to identify an error. And so what we can actually see is like, oh, there's some kind of problem with the code. Again, the messages have a tendency to repeat, and so you can, of course, clear this file out if you wish, which can make it slightly easier. But we'll notice that in T institution on line 103, there's some kind of experiment variable that's not defined. So let's say we go and we try to fix this. So it was line 103. We go down to 103, and we see that there's these two old log statements. And so what we're actually going to do to do these, so we're going to change these log messages around slightly. And so what we're going to see is that there's actually several of these logging.log file, which is the older style of doing it. And we don't want to do that anymore because, we've evolved technologically here. So what we can actually do is self.log message and use that function. We can change all of these to that. Self.log message. And if we wanted to log data, we would do the same thing, except instead of saying log message, we would say self.log data. So that's how that works. And so in this case, we don't need the experiment variable because that's no longer relevant. So we can go ahead and delete this. So the core thing here is just to kind of show you how these log messages get constructed. So at present, you have to provide the log system a whole string. So in this case, right, we just turn it, so the plus means we're just concatenating onto a string. So that's all that's going on there. And so if we look around, we should see that we've been able to update this code, right? And the hope is that at this point, we should be able to run this without any additional problems, right? So that's kind of the goal. And you'll also note here, to be clear, the print statements aren't necessarily going to help you much because they're at least in this mode, they're typically going to be suppressed and they won't be emitted in the web interface. So in this instance, this would be, if you can't see it, if you're not running the mTree runner, you might want to do self.log message. Okay, so now we can actually go ahead down to this thespian.log file, and we can just delete the contents of it, clear it out, because if there's new messages when we run it again, we'd like to see those in kind of an uncluttered way. So we can go back here. I'm just flipping back over to developer server, and I can run the simulation again. It should run, and so in this case, right, we actually don't have any log messages in the thespian.log file, so that's great. That would seem to suggest that we fixed something, right? And we also have this bigger log file here, so that's kind of the way in which you can do development, right? So you can kind of sit, write some code instead of having to set up a separate process or kind of rerun the mTree runner. You can just kind of keep this web interface up and running and run simulation. We have additional features that should make it hopefully even easier, but those are still in development at this point. So that's kind of the magic that we're going to release in this initial 0.9 release. Like I said, we have a bunch of other features that are kind of queued up as we kind of reorganize a bunch of stuff, but they're not quite ready to be sent out in the wild just yet. So that's what you can do. So you can download the Docker container information. You can use the Port 5000. You can use the mTree developer server, and you can run your microeconomic systems and look at the log files, and hopefully develop in a much more iterative and fast way. And then when you're done, of course, you can just stop the Docker container. Okay, so that's all you need to see. And once we have the next update, we'll have another walkthrough that gives you some ideas of those features.